All right, hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us for Left Bank Books presents Missouri authors Martha Gershun and John D. Lantos, who will share their new compelling book, Kidney to Share. Gershun and Lantos will be in conversation today with professor, social philosopher, and physician at St. Louis University, Jeffrey Bishop. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Martha, John, and Jeff, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. We are very happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you so much for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so you can type your questions as a comment. And you can do that at any point in time as you think of the question. Put it in the comments. Be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We have so many incredible events for May, June, and are adding events for July that are just wonderful and are for readers of all ages. So be sure to follow and pay attention to our event calendar. And now about tonight's book, Kidney to Share. In Kidney to Share, Martha Gershun tells the story of her decision to donate a kidney to a stranger. She takes readers through the complex process by which such donors are vetted to ensure that they are physically and psychologically fit to take the risk of a major operation. John D. Lantos, a physician and bioethicist, places Gershun's story in the larger context of the history of kidney transplantation and the ethical controversies that surround living donors. Together, they help readers understand the discoveries that made transplantation relatively safe and effective, as well as the legal, ethical, and economic policies that make it feasible. Gershun and Lantos explore the steps involved in recovering and allocating organs. They analyze the differences that arise depending on whether the organ comes from a living donor or one who has died. They observe the expertise and the shortcomings of doctors, nurses, and other professionals who describe the burdens that we place on people who are willing to donate. In this raw and vivid book, Gershun and Lantos ask us to consider just how far society should go in using one person's healthy body parts in order to save another person. Kidney to Share provides an account of organ donation that is both personal and analytical. The combination of perspectives leads to a profound and compelling exploration of a largely opaque practice. Gershun and Lantos pull back the curtain to offer readers a more transparent view of the fascinating world of organ donation. Katie Watson, the author of Scarlet A, says, "Reading this lively book is like eavesdropping on an honest exchange between erudite friends. The insight of the authors into how our collective ambivalence about living organ donors is enacted in the medical maze they must navigate is revelatory." And Perry Klass, the author of A Good Time to Be Born, says, "Kidney to Share is a remarkably fascinating work, a mix of personal narrative and medical history that brilliantly teases out the most scientific and ethical complexities of modern medicine." This book, with its overlapping voices and contributions to a medically suspenseful organ transplant story, is at once intimate, educational, clear-eyed, heartfelt, and profoundly moving. And now about tonight's speakers. Martha Gershun is the former executive director of Jackson County CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. She is author of Care in Custody, and her work has appeared in the Kansas City Star, the New York Times Magazine, Veller, and the Radcliffe Quarterly. You can follow her on Twitter at mgershun. John D. Lantos, MD, is director of the Bioethics Center at Children's Mercy Hospital and professor of pediatrics at the University of Missouri Kansas City School of Medicine. His books include Do We Still Need Doctors, Neonatal Bioethics, and Controversial Bodies. He is associate editor of American Journal of Bioethics, Perspectives in Biology and Medicine, and Current Problems in Pediatrics and Adolescent Healthcare. And you can follow him on Twitter at John Lantos. And tonight they will be in conversation with Jeffrey Bishop. Jeffrey Bishop holds the Tennant Endowed Chair in Bioethics and also professor of philosophy at St. Louis University. He also served as the director of Albert Nagy Center for Healthcare Ethics from 2010 to 2018 at SLU. He is the author of The Anticipatory Corpse, Medicine, Power, and the Care of the Dying, and just completed work on another book, Chasing After Virtue, Neuroscience, Economics, and the Biopolitics of Morality. His scholarly work explores the medical, political, and philosophical conditions that shape modern medical and scientific theories and practices. And now, without further ado, if you would please help me in welcoming to the screen Martha Gershun, John D. Lantos, and Jeffrey Bishop for Left Bank Books. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Hey, Shane. Thank you.
It's great to have you here tonight, and happy to have authors from both sides of the state here. So really excited to support this Missouri event.
Thanks, Shane. What a joy to be with the two of you, John and Martha. And thanks for inviting me to be a part of this and for writing this book, bringing it into existence. And kidney transplantation is something that, or organ donation is something that most people is something very obscure, and you've brought it into the forefront for so many of us in very vivid ways. And the first thing I'm thinking that probably most people out there are thinking, Martha, is what on earth would prompt someone to say, I've got one too many kidneys here. I think I'm going to just give one of these extra ones away. What was going through your mind here?
That is the question that everybody asks. And the truth is, it was both very impetuous and a very long-standing decision. There's kidney donation in my family background. My dear cousin Ann in Omaha needed a kidney, and in 2002, a family friend donated. So living kidney donation was something I knew about, something I'd heard about, something that was familiar. And I knew the joy it could bring and the ways it could keep a family together by keeping someone alive. But I didn't do anything in 2002 or 2003 or 2004. It took until 2018 when I was reading the Kansas City Jewish Chronicle about a gal, Deb Porter Gill, who needed a kidney. And I thought, right now, this is the moment, this is the time. I had just retired from Jackson County CASA. I was looking for other ways to contribute, to make a difference, another project to keep me busy and happy. Our kids were grown. Don, my husband's job was stable. It was possible. And I really think people don't recognize the extent to which point of time really matters. If I'd read that article 5 years sooner or 5 years later, I don't know that it would have spoken to me. But that day, it really did.
So the stars sort of aligned there for you, having the seed planted a number of years back, and then everything just kind of fell into place. That's very interesting. So what was, when you first thought of this, I mean, who did you reach out to? How did you even bring this up in conversation? How did this all unfold?
So the first thing I did is I put the newspaper down, and I thought, okay, just because you thought of this doesn't mean you have to do it. Let's take a minute here. And by evening, when my husband had come home from work, I said, read this article. And he looked up and he said, you're going to do this? I said, yeah, I think I'm going to try. I knew that it was hard to match. I understood that in a non-biological relationship, the odds of matching are very low. The article said 1 in 100,000, and I've heard that number before. So what I really thought wasn't, I'm going to do this. I thought, I'm going to try to do this. And in this case, what that meant was calling a phone number. There was a phone number at the bottom of the article. It said, if you want to be Deb's kidney donor, call the Mayo Transplant Center. So the next day, I picked up the phone and I gave him a call.
Wow. So within a 24-hour period, you'd gone from, oh, this is a great idea. Everything kind of aligned, or it took a while for everything to unfold. And then within 24 hours, you were making the phone call. That's amazing. So what did you say? Hey, I'm ready to give up one of my kidneys. How did that conversation unfold?
So it unfolded just like that, because I watch like a lot of medical procedurals, ER and Chicago Med and Grey's Anatomy. And my picture was, I'm calling, they're answering the phone, and they're like, oh my God, we have someone for Deb. Oh my God. No. This is what happens. They say, okay. I start saying, and I had to cuss, okay. Please go to the following website. There is a questionnaire. Please fill the questionnaire out. We will be back to you. I mean, the person you're talking to didn't know who Deb was. She didn't know who I was. She didn't care.
Yeah.
Basically, their whole job is to get you to the medical questionnaire on the website. So I would say the initial contact was a little deflating.
Yeah, I guess you're thinking, get Deb here, stat, and that just didn't happen, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, so John, it sounds a little nuts to the average person out there that to just think, okay, within a 24-hour period, I'm going to call up and I'm going to offer to give my kidney to someone who's a stranger. Tell us a little bit about the history of some of this kind of exacting way that medical people have thought about this over the years.
Yeah, one of the things we do in the book is go through a little bit of that history, and we go back to the 1950s when the pioneers were first trying to figure out how to do this previously unimaginable and unsuccessful thing, to take an organ out of one person's body and put it in another. Remember, at that time, they didn't understand anything about histocompatibility. The immunology was primitive. There were not many immunosuppressive drugs, and they didn't even know whether they'd need them. And the early experiments in this, the first few people had horrendous courses. I mean, they'd put in a kidney and the kidney would fail and people would get septic and they'd die of infections, or they'd immunosuppress them, or they'd not immunosuppress. There's a great book about it called The Courage to Fail by Renee Fox that just describes how one after another recipients died. The one exception was close relatives, living donors. And identical twins were the best. So the first transplants that worked were either siblings or identical twins. And a couple of those cases involved minors, 18 or 19-year-olds, which was a minor in Massachusetts back then. And the doctors went to court to say, are we allowed to do this? It may be like too brutal to take a healthy person and cut out one of their organs. The court had a psychiatrist evaluate the family and the potential donor and made an elaborate argument that, yeah, this is bad to do to a healthy person, but it's also bad if he lets his sibling die, if he lets his twin brother die. And the psychological benefit of saving his brother's life outweighs the medical risk of taking a kidney out of his body. And that then became sort of the ethical paradigm for this. If it's someone you love, if it's someone you're close to, you can do it. But that's the only time. And that was also the medical rationale for choosing siblings.
Yeah, that makes good sense. That's you care for someone, you love someone, and so we're all entangled in families, right? We're tangled up with the good of the other person, and so it's awfully easy to think through it that way. So how did we move from that to, oh, this stranger is here? What's this all about?
So the science got better first, so that with better understanding of immunology and better immunosuppression, it became possible to do a transplant from someone who wasn't so closely biologically related. So then things started happening, like a husband would want to donate to a wife, not biologically related. And people would go, but that psychological benefit is there. We're going to allow that to happen. And then somebody would say, well, one of my coworkers needs a kidney. And people would go like, is that the same sort of psychological benefit? Can we justify the risk? And a few places said, yeah, they're really good friends. We're going to let them do it. And then, as might have been anticipated, crazy people like Martha started coming forward and saying, like, I'm going to donate to somebody I read about in the newspaper. Or the most challenging ones were when people came in and said, I just want to give a kidney. You must have people who need them. I've read about people on the waiting list. Take one of mine. And initially, every transplant center in the country, first response to that was refer to psychiatry. This person must be insane. And there were a bunch of papers published in the 80s, mostly 80s and 90s, that described some of the psychiatric evaluations of these people. And we summarized some of them in the book, and the psychiatrists are all like very skeptical. Like, why do you want to do this? And the donors would say, well, I just like to help other people. And, I donate blood, and I signed up to be a bone marrow donor. Those are all legal. What's the problem here? And they go like, well, the risk is 1 in 5,000 people die. And they go like, yeah, that sounds pretty small to me. I'm willing to take that risk. And they're like, are you part of a religious sect or something? And you go, well, I go to church, but that motivates some of my beliefs. And the doctors go like, not everybody who goes to church wants to donate a kidney. There must be something wrong with you. And many times they'd make people wait, like go home and think about it for 3 months or 6 months before they'd accept them.
Yeah.
And gradually, this started to shift in the United States. Most European countries didn't permit it. The UK had a law against donation unless you could prove you were a close friend or had a emotional connection. And people would like find a recipient and pose for pictures at a bar and go like, look, we're close friends. Germany still does not allow donations unless people are emotionally connected. But gradually it started to shift as the outcomes got better and the risks got lower. And many places now accept donors who don't have any connection with their recipient.
Well, I want to do two things here. So Martha, on this point, first, did they force you to see a psychiatrist? I know the stories, but go ahead, and why don't you tell us a little bit about that part of it, because it's humorous.
So I had to see 3 different therapists when I went to Mayo for my medical evaluation, and I had to send up my own therapy records. So I did 2 things that scared Mayo on that medical form, that very first disclosure form. They weren't concerned about my medical history. I'm a really healthy person, but I disclosed that I occasionally, out of state where it is completely legal, smoked recreational marijuana. And that really threw up a red flag. And I also disclosed that from time to time, I see a therapist here in Kansas City who helps me when things get tough. She helped me decide that it was time to retire. And these red flags were really significant. So they demanded, if I wanted to continue to be screened, that I do 2 things. One, my therapist was to fax up my entire mental health file. I'd seen the woman like 8 times. I mean, it wasn't that thick a file, but okay. Fax up my entire file. And I was to come to Mayo and meet a substance abuse counselor. So these are 2 of the kinds of obstacles that we talk about in the book. Some are financial, some are logistics, some are more even higher bar. But those 2 were really problematic. My therapist refused to fax up my records. She said it was nobody's business, and that once Deb's and my files were merged, as they would eventually be, her team would have access, that who knew who would ever find out those deep, dark secrets I disclosed about my, family of origin. And instead, she offered to write a letter summarizing our conversations and saying I didn't have a mental health diagnosis. Mayo accepted that, but they wouldn't let me get out of the substance abuse counselor That was a real problem because it turned out that Mayo doesn't have very many substance abuse counselors, and the only appointment that they could not offer me on the 3-day visit that Don and I took up to Rochester for me to be evaluated was that appointment. They wanted me to come back for a second trip to talk to a substance abuse counselor because I smoked a little weed on vacation in Colorado. So I'm not going to tell you what happened. That story ended happily because I am articulate and I am persuasive and I am passionate. And I suspect because I am affluent and white, that I eventually talked my way out of that appointment. I can only imagine that there are circumstances where somebody would have been making that second trip up to Mayo.
Well, and what's funny is that they now they weren't concerned about whether you were somehow emotionally or irrationally disturbed. They had a different kind of paranoia about something that we finally have outgrown, but still on the form, there's something there about it, and so that got you in trouble. So yeah, you should have just said no to that question, I guess.
I learned my lesson, Jeff. I've learned that lesson.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk a little bit about Deb. Did you know her before? I mean, how did you come? I mean, you read about her in the newspaper, but you also had some crossing paths, if not actual meetings. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I had not met Deb before, but I should have. We had gone to the same synagogue. She had raised children there. They had gone to the same religious schools that my son and daughter went to. She had been a prosecutor in the child sex crimes office in Jackson County, Missouri, where I later was an advocate. But despite all those possible ways our paths could cross, I didn't know her. I didn't know her family, though her father had been on the board of the nonprofit that my husband runs. I mean, there were many ways we should have met, but hadn't. I did not meet her going through the initial process until Mayo called. And normally I'd be giving away like the pinnacle of the book, but obviously since I'm here, you all know this happened, I matched. Deb and I did win that 1 in 100,000 lottery. We were a perfect histocompatible match. John keeps telling me that's such a miracle that could possibly have happened. After that, I asked Mayo, are you going to tell Deb? I'm still looking for my Chicago Med moment. We've found your match. And they said, we won't. You're protected under HIPAA. If you want her to know, or if you want to meet her, it's up to you. It was never a question for me. I was not going to be an anonymous donor. I'm not an anonymous person. And I thought this project, and it's a big project, would be easier with a partner. And the obvious partner, of course, is the person on the other side of that kidney exchange. The problem was I didn't know how to find Deb. She lived in another state. She has a very common last name. I Googled it, got all kinds of people. Finally, I had the brilliant idea of looking on Facebook. And sure enough, there she was. And I literally, this is how I met my kidney recipient. I messaged her on Facebook.
the modern, so you literally were probably in the same room with her at some point in Kansas City, but you only could reach out to her via Facebook. That's the modern world we live in now. So it's kind of strange, the world we were in. So John, if she hadn't reached out to Deb, she still could have donated specifically to Deb. And I want you to kind of unfold some of the complexities of donor recipient relations, and then also this whole new thing we have called these chains, just kind of unfold the complexity of all of that. You're muted, John, I think.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, donors don't necessarily meet their recipients. It's voluntary. You can donate to a stranger, or you can try to contact them. And although most donations from living donors are what they call directed donations, so they know who they want to donate to, and it's either a relative or a close friend. So most living donations are not arm's length the way this one was. Some are, as I said, take my kidney, give it to whoever needs it. I don't even need to know. And then there's this intermediate one where sort of you want to get to know your donor or your recipient. The background to all of this, which gets to the second part of your question, is the dire shortage of organs. So if you have kidney failure, luckily there's dialysis. So that's essentially an artificial kidney, and people can stay on dialysis for decades, although it's a brutal, burdensome treatment in the sense that you either have to go to a dialysis center for hemo or do peritoneal dialysis at home. In either case, it's not an ideal treatment. Everybody says a transplant is better. Almost everybody on dialysis wants to get a transplant. They're on a waiting list for a transplant, and there's 100,000 people on that waiting list in the United States now. 12 of them die every day in the United States. So there's a dire shortage of organs. And even when people want to donate, like Martha, you have to go in and see if you match. And if you don't match to someone you want to donate, usually a loved one, then until very recently, they'd say, sorry, you can't donate. And then an economist who was then at Harvard, he's now at Stanford, worked with some transplant surgeons and said, hey, I have an idea. What if I want to donate to Jeff and Martha wants to donate to Shane, but I don't match with Jeff and Martha doesn't match with Shane, but Martha matches with Jeff and I match with Shane. I don't know Shane. I want to save Jeff. They said, how about a paired exchange? You donate, Jeff will get a kidney, it won't be yours. Martha will donate, Shane will get a kidney, it won't be Martha's, but your loved ones will both survive. It will increase the supply side of organs for donation. And then once that happened, people said, it doesn't just have to be two people. I could donate to Jeff. Martha could donate to Shane. Shane's donor could donate to whoever. You go down the list, you can have 6, 8, 10, 12 person-long chains that are logistical nightmares since everybody has to sort of donate at the same time and nobody can get sick and all that. One of the questions that raised, though, this was an economist who figured this out, and his agenda was you increase supplies of things by building better markets, more efficient markets. And this was essentially a form of barter, which at the time was questionably legal in the United States. Medicare and the federal government has since tweaked the rules and said, no, this kind of barter is specifically permitted. But it's sort of opened the door to people thinking, well, could I donate a kidney and somebody else donate part of a liver? Could I donate a kidney and get a voucher in case a loved one needs a kidney later in life? Could I donate a kidney and somebody make a contribution to my favorite charity? All different ways of enticing people to donate.
Sure, and you know, you're exactly right. The shortage is amazing, and it has prompted many people like Ben Hippen, who is a nephrologist, to argue that, well, look, we need to be able to actually have a real market where there is potentially exchange of funds. Mark Cherry has written very forcefully, very powerfully about this, about the only people not getting paid or not getting some sort of compensation or benefit from an organ transplantation situation is the donor or the donor's family in the case of the deceased donor. So they've said, hey, markets do work. They're both very market-minded people. Markets do work. What's wrong with something like that?
Fascinating question. There are certain body parts that we have vibrant markets in. People sell blood, people sell plasma, people sell hair, people sell sperm, people sell ova, and that's perfectly legal. One thing they all have in common, they regenerate. And kidneys do not. And so people get sort of an icky feeling. But if you kind of unpack it, I think comes down to three things, three big concerns that most people have about markets: inequality and related health disparities, coercion, and quality. That is the quality of both the kidney that's being transplanted and, as a result, the chances of success for the recipient. Think of it this way. If you're poor and there's a market for your kidneys and you need the money, and you get that questionnaire and it says, you're using any drugs? Do you have any diseases? You might say, like, if I say yes, I'm not going to get the money. No, perfectly healthy. Never smoked pot. Never saw a psychiatrist in my life. And so you might end up with lack of transparency, people trying to hide problems that could lead to a bad outcome after the transplant. It's also, I mean, the inequality and coercion. I mean, if a market was truly a free market, kidneys would go to the highest bidder. So you could imagine futures markets in kidneys and people bidding up the price, perhaps particularly for rare, HLA antigen kidneys. And that might get a little coercive for people who really don't want to donate but are desperate for cash. So those are all some of the concerns to be balanced against this dire need.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, we'll work out, procedures and policies that would shore up these things to make sure none of those bad outcomes happen." And yet, we can look at it and we see that people still find ways to game any system. If you know the system, you know how to play the game, right? And so it doesn't matter what procedures or policies are in place, somebody's going to figure out a way to game the system, and that just happens all the time. But I want to ask Martha this question. I mean, Martha, what if you could have been paid for this? I will say everybody needs to read the book because you paid in a different way. We'll come to that in a moment. You paid, with a lot of heartache and ups and downs and things that got in your way a little bit. But what if you got paid for this? What would that make you? Would it made it feel dirty? Would it made it feel? How would you have felt about that?
I don't think it's something I would have done for money. It was something I did to be an altruist, to feel good about myself. But that doesn't mean I don't think other people shouldn't be paid to do it. I do all kinds of things for free. I volunteer extensively, both my time and my brains and my expertise that somebody who needs money should expect to be paid for, should expect to sell. So the fact that I was already retired, that I didn't need to work for a living, that I'm financially secure and didn't need the money, doesn't mean that somebody else who needs the money, who has a perfectly healthy kidney just as good as mine, shouldn't be able to sell it. John knows I feel very strongly about this. I'm a real body autonomy person. I believe that sex work should be legalized. I believe that your body is yours, and if you want to sell it for a specific purpose, you should be allowed to. And this is what I always say. We let people do things that threaten their lives all the time for money. We let people go down the mine, even though we know they're going to get black lung. We let firefighters, cops, we let people go into the 9/11 building, even though we knew it was probably coming down on them. Why shouldn't someone who needs money be allowed to sell a kidney? But no, instead they have to work at McDonald's during a pandemic, possibly getting COVID and bringing it home to their kids. So this, I find it very disingenuous when we say we're protecting people. How paternalistic that we decide that's protection, and all those other ways that people earn money are not.
Well, now I have to ask your co-author, a bioethicist, about this. So John, what do you think about what Martha just said?
Well, I think no matter how a market could be structured, there's always going to be an element of the doctors or the healthcare system setting up criteria by which people are screened and deemed to be acceptable or not. Once you put that in place, you're being paternalistic. No doctor is going to let you donate your heart or sell your heart, or even if you're a high-risk kidney patient, if they think this is going to be significantly detrimental to your health, they're not going to let you do it. So, or they're not going to participate. They're not going to be complicit. And I think that's a good thing. I think we don't want doctors saying, yeah, you want to die? Sure, I'll cut out your heart. I think that would hollow out the core of the medical profession and take us too far from the ideals of doing what's best for people. So the question is, if there's going to be this sort of paternalistic regulation telling people what they're allowed to do or not do, what should it look like? And I mean, one of the things we talk about in the book is somewhere between the current system and a totally free market would be something where we get rid of some of the barriers that currently exist, including financial barriers, and make it easier for people to donate and not lose money doing it.
Well, one of the things that Martha just points to so well in her parts of the book is just all of the barriers, all of the silly little bureaucratic and procedural dimensions, and including her driving all over Kansas City trying to find dry ice. You have to read the book to figure this out. It was like I was biting my nails to figure out whether you were going to find it. So there are all these things in place that kind of get in the way, that are just the bureaucratic procedures and sometimes nightmares. And I have to say, Martha, you were just so tenacious, and so you were like a pit bull and bitten onto something. You weren't going to let go. And it took that, it seems, at points. So tell us a little bit about that, and then we're going to open it up for questions after you finish here. But you really had to work hard at this. It was you had to pay in a different way. You paid with a little blood, sweat, and tears, literally. So
Literally, this is
and urine.
and urine. I gave these people a lot of pee. Let me tell you, the system is not set up to make it convenient for the donor. They say over and over again that everything will be scheduled at the convenience for the donor, but they're just lying about that. The truth is that for a distance donor like me, I was 6 hours away from Mayo. That's how far Kansas City is from Rochester. Time and time again, I had to find ways to get lab results up to them, blood results up to them, urine up to them. In the end, I calculated it, mostly because John and I were writing this book. My husband and I, between us, used 10 full work weeks to get this project done. Now, for me, those weren't paid weeks. I'm retired, but my husband is still working. That was paid time off for him. That was his entire vacation time for the year. He has a generous employer. It worked out. Our out-of-pocket expenses were over $4,000. That was mostly hotels, travel, meals. In our case, my recipient reimbursed us, and that's allowed by law. But once again, not every recipient has the means to reimburse their donor, and not every donor has the means to say, as Donna and I did, this is part of our gift. We can afford this. The system is basically set up so that you cannot donate a kidney unless you are well-resourced, intelligent, comfortable with the English language, have good transportation. And maybe that's okay for altruistic kidney donors like me, who are just really trying to do a nice, good thing in the world. But if you're trying to save the life of your sister or your child or your mother, what right do we have to put these kinds of barriers in place? Every kidney transplant saves private insurance or Medicare over $1 million in the lifetime savings over dialysis. And yet the only person who doesn't benefit in any way is the kidney donor, who has to go through surgery and pay for the privilege. So that's really why I wanted to write the book. I really felt that if that were brought to light, we might, John and me with our recommendations, be able to make a little bit of headway in the system.
Well, very good. I'm going to remind everybody to go ahead and place comments into the comment section and our questions. And John, just quickly, I mean, what the bureaucratic pieces that, I mean, anybody who's ever worked in a hospital knows the bureaucratic nightmares and the boxes that are ticked and the hoops that are jumped through and all of that. I mean, what can be done about all of this?
Yeah, sort of the take-home lesson of the book is a slogan: treat donors like donors. The one thing hospitals, the one department in hospitals that's very good at cutting through that bureaucratic mess is the philanthropy department. If somebody wants to give a hospital lots of money, suddenly somebody will meet you at the curb and walk you up to clinic and, make sure you have everything you need and send you birthday cards and take care of you. In a reciprocal gift agreement, you're taking care of us, we'll take care of you. Donors should be treated the same, organ donors should be treated the same way, instead of being treated like second-class patients, which is sort of how they're treated now.
Yeah, it sort of seems that way. I mean, they go through a lot, and they're taking a risk, albeit a low risk, and then to have to drive all over Kansas City looking for dry ice, that just was like, what the hell is going on here, Well, Shane, I think we're ready to open it up for questions and comments. So why don't you go ahead?
Sounds good. So first off, obvious first comment from Deborah saying, I'm Deb and I love Martha. She is amazing in so many ways. I am forever grateful for the life she has given me. So to have like that connection and seemingly, and actually, I don't know how many years ago this was that you.
So 2018.
Yeah.
Okay, so so you've been friends now for a few years. And,
oh, yeah. Yeah, and we text and we talk and we Facebook. We're quite lively together.
I can see that probably being true. So Alan says, thank you, Martha. Without you, my wife and I wouldn't have such a great friend. You are a mensch. We have Rebecca saying, thank you for giving me my dear friend. So a lot of people seeming to be friends with either you, Martha, or Deb. Really just showing the kind of long-lasting connection that this act can give you. So I don't know if you have seen this in other donors, having that like long-lasting relationship built with friends and family of the people who receive the organs. I don't know if you want to speak on that a little bit.
Well, one of the things I can talk to about that is I'm also the family member of a kidney recipient. And Cheryl Cooper was the kidney donor for my cousin Anne. The book, my part of the dedication, John got his own part, but my part of the dedication is in Anne's memory and to Cheryl. And I can tell you that I already understood what it meant to have the life of someone you cared for deeply be saved, and to have additional weddings and bar and bat mitzvahs and family parties and Thanksgivings. I knew what that meant and what that felt like. So I often think people look at me as a kidney donor, but really I'm also the family member of a kidney recipient. And understanding how that feels, well, that'll keep you going when you're driving around looking for dry ice, right? If Cheryl had given up at that stage, my cousin Anne wouldn't have gotten her kidney. So I think I was very motivated by understanding that part of the story. When I was at Mayo being evaluated, we had to go through a class, what it means to be a kidney donor 101. And there were several people in that class who are seeking to give organs to family members. And you could see how desperate they were for this to work, because I was desperate to be able to give a kidney. And I liked Deb and I wanted Deb to live, but she wasn't my child. You could see the intensity, people trying to save the lives of a teenage kid.
George is asking, well, kind of so George says, good point about paying the family of a deceased donor. What's the downside to that? Oh, of course, families might off their least desirable family members and sell their organs. But that kind of leads to my question of, like, how real is the black market? And is that just, like, because of the age that I am and the terrible, like, horror movies that I was raised with, like, is it a real thing? And is it something that is as bad as I think it is?
Those urban legends of like going to a bar and waking up in a hotel room with a scar on your abdomen.
Yeah.
My sense is that is not real. I don't know what Jeff thinks, but I'll be interested to hear. I think what is real, there are countries that have legalized markets in kidneys. Iran for many years. I'm not sure if it's still legal in Iran. But what would happen is people would show up with someone who they claimed was their willing donor. And it was hard to tell whether the relationship was, whether the donation, whether the participation was voluntary, whether this person really wanted to do it or not. So in that sense, there may be markets, usually, or there may be black markets, usually with somebody, with a designated recipient rather than organ robbers stealing your kidneys and selling them. I think it would be unimaginable that a medical center in the United States would procure a kidney on the black market, given the kind of stuff that we write about in the book and the careful screening they do of donors in order to make sure that if they're going to do this procedure, the organ that they're transplanting is healthy and safe. For cadaver donors, though, the big debate is not so much about markets. I don't think, I'm not even aware, maybe you know this, Jeff, whether Ben Hippen or the other people who propose markets are talking about markets for cadaver donors. People have talked about sort of futures markets for, you get paid now to agree to donate a kidney. The tricky thing about cadaver markets and the way we treat cadaver donors different than donors, organs from living donors, is when you're a living donor, the recipient is alive now. When you donate, you know who it's going to get. With cadaver donors, you don't know when you're going to die. So you don't know who's going to be there at the top of the list to get your kidney. And so in most countries, cadaver donors are treated as public property. They go into a pool. They're allocated not based on, the deceased person saying, I want it to go to George over here, or even I want it to go to a white person or a Jewish person. They go in the pool and they're allocated based on semi-governmental allocation schemes that prioritize people based on need. And the question is, different countries have said, your organs only go in the pool if you say, I'm willing to be a donor, versus some countries that have what they call presumed consent. Your organs only don't go in the pool if you opt out. Therefore, it goes a step further to treating cadaver donors like a communal resource, saying even the family doesn't own it unless the person has opted out. But I don't think markets for cadaver donors have taken off.
Well, thank you for easing some of my urban legend fears.
I can't promise you 100%. So be careful what you drink.
I read a lot of mysteries and I like martinis. So
it's that shady looking guy slipping something into your martini.
So Sam is asking, has a question. Can a donor be eligible to be a recipient at a later time if needed, or does becoming a donor take away that option? Also, if there's a match on one organ, will other organs also match, or is it a one-to-one match specific to each organ?
So in the first one, yes, you can be a recipient. And in fact, if you've donated by this national allocation scheme, you go to the top of the list. So there is that sort of kind of reward, if you will, for donating. On the matching, yeah, it would be a match for any body part if you're histocompatible.
Gee, I hope Deb doesn't need part of a liver anytime soon.
Each organ has different types of matching, though, too. So livers, it turns out, for some reason, are easier to match than kidneys.
we'll get to another question, but Deborah says, or Deb says, but there's no downside to be able to donate your organs, save numerous lives, and leave your family something upon your death. So I think basically saying that we should all very much consider being organ, like signing the back of your ID saying, I will be an organ donor. Rebecca is asking, till what age can you donate?
So that's a really interesting question. I was worried that I was going to be too old. I had just aged out of being a bone marrow donor. I had been on the bone marrow registry for a very long time. And and maybe this is another reason that I was so motivated to call Mayo when I read the story. But when I turned 60, I got an email from the bone marrow registry saying, you have fulfilled your commitment, which basically means you're too old, honey. We won't take your marrow anymore. So when I called Mayo, that was one of the first things I said, which is I came too old to donate bone marrow. No, kidneys go a lot longer. The most recent article I read about that was a man who was 75 in Austin, Texas, who was a living kidney donor. There was just an article about a deceased donor who was 95, who was an organ donor, and the headline said, oldest organ donor in all of history. When I was at Mayo being evaluated, one of the things the nephrologist told me is that there are advantages to being an older kidney donor. A lot of the things that could compromise your health with only one kidney are things like contact sports, football, motorcycle racing, things that people in my age cohort are less likely to engage in. Pregnancy, while it's perfectly possible to have a baby on one kidney, pregnancy is a kidney stressor. And so again, women like me who are well past the age of thinking that's a good idea, don't have as much at risk. And the other thing, and they said this very nicely, which I appreciated, is I have to live less long on one kidney than someone who donates at the age of 18. So if there's any reduced function, any reduced power, I don't have to make it another 50 years. The odds of that are very, very unlikely. So again, they were pretty nice about it at Mayo, but when I said, is my age an issue, they were kind of like, no, we like older donors. This is good.
And age itself is not an issue, but age is associated with lots of other diseases that are an issue. So you would have to have a real age, or be healthy, a healthy 80-year-old to be a donor.
Alan's question is kind of bringing up another topic or Alan's statement is bringing up another question that I have. Alan says, I've thought about donating as Martha did, but I'm reluctant in case one of my siblings should need a kidney in the future. And I'm wondering what the science is behind, so someone like me who has a history of kidney stones in their family, and the very real potential that one of my family members might, well, I don't know how bad kidney stones can make a kidney. I have no idea. I don't know what the family history is. But for someone like me who is worried about something like that, like if as like I'm on the younger end of the donation spectrum, I guess. So if I were considering it, what would your reluctance as a doctor be to someone like me?
Jeff, you want to?
Well, yeah. So well, this is the whole point about vouchers, is to try to stop people from worrying about this point. So siblings are going to be your best matches, right? So you think, okay, well, I've got two. If one of my sibling needs it, I'd be happy to give up one of them, especially if there's some chance that some kidney disease runs in the family, like polycystic kidney disease or something like that, something where there's real chance of failure. People might think that way, but I think the voucher systems that that John was talking about earlier that are being put into place is an attempt to obviate that as a problem, right? To remove it as a problem, so that if you donate now, you get a voucher that says, aha, one of my family members might be able to use this voucher. I don't even know if vouchers can be used for other family members, but Yeah, that's so the idea is to kind of circulate to spread the good around a little bit in different ways. And so this would help to get rid of one of those problems.
And remember, you yourself, if you need a kidney, go to the head of the list, which is the equivalent of a voucher. Just to put the numbers in perspective, I mean, if you do have kidney disease in the family, you should definitely talk to your doctor, because your family might have a higher risk of needing a kidney someday. Although you might not be the best donor if that disease runs in your family, because you'd just be giving the same disease. But I mean, to put the numbers into perspective, in 2020 there were about 15 or 16,000 organs donated, about 30,000 kidney transplants in the United States altogether. So 30,000 out of 300 million people, you're talking the chances that any person's going to need a kidney in any year are well below like 0.001%. Not zero.
Not zero.
But the chances that a healthy loved one would need a kidney are blessedly pretty low.
And in fact, one of the things people ask me when I said, I'm giving a kidney, oh, who? A stranger, right? You get a lot of reactions. And one of the very common ones is, what if your husband needs a kidney? What if your children need a kidney? Well, I am not anything like a biological match for my husband, right? We match on many things, but not histocompatibility. And as it turns out, with my blood type, I'm only a match for one of my two kids, right? I mean, we all did those little graphs in middle school. But nonetheless, and because I understood about chains and other ways to benefit, I talked to both our kids, they're young adults, before I made this decision. And my sort of favorite quote in the whole book is our son Nathan, who said at the time, "Mom, I do not think our family should hoard our kidneys." And I realized by his language, that's a little bit like saying Don and I shouldn't be giving money to charity because the kids might need the money someday. The kids don't need the money today. Other people do. We give money to charity. So in some ways, you can think about organs like any other resource, and the odds that it's actually going to be required to benefit one of your family members. Now, in very specific instances where you already know, then of course people wait, right? Of course they conserve, but they're really quite rare.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all for this really kind of fascinating, optimistic and hopeful event, because it is really wonderful to hear a story, and such a personal story too, about like how organ donation can be such a kind of story of happiness and story of success. So it's really fantastic to have to written this book and to have done this event with us.
And thanks to you, Shane, and Left Bank Books for hosting us. This was really a lot of fun for us, and my old friend Jeff Bishop for taking time out of your busy life. You're probably grading papers, but thanks for joining us.
It was great fun to be with you all. So I think we should end with this reading, this little phrase though from the Talmud, that's the epigraph for the book. Whoever saves a single life is considered to have saved the whole world. So I think Martha, you're in good stead. So
thank you all so much. Thanks for a lovely evening.
And to the audience watching, I did share the link again for how you can get a signed copy. They are on our shelves now at Left Bank Books. And thank you all so much for being here tonight, for watching this event, and for supporting independent bookstores. All right, have a great evening, and we will see you next time.